Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Gans-Blythe. I'm the Elizabeth and John Moores Director of the Harvard Art Museums, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. Thank you for joining us for this opening lecture to celebrate sketch, shade, smudge, drawing from gray to black. After the lecture, the galleries will be open until 9 p.m., and we invite you to enjoy this glorious exhibition. Among the many striking drawings on view is one by Lee Bonteque. It is a fanciful flower rendered in graphite on white wove paper. And at one point, Lee Bonteque declared that the little pencil is a magic stick. And in fact, her drawing is indeed one, and each one, drawing in the exhibition is an example of that simple equation between the drawing implement and the artist's hands and what they can conjure up. And to delve into this evening, we will first hear a brief introduction to the exhibition from its two curators, which is Penley Knight and the Philip and Lynn Strauss Senior Conservator of Works of Art on Paper and head of the Paper Lab, and Miriam Stewart, who is the curator of the collection in the Division of European and American Art. This will be followed by a lecture, Sticks, Stumps, and Fingers, Drawings Revealed by Kimberly Schenck, who was the former head of paper conservation at the National Gallery of Art. And as many of you might know, the Harvard Art Museums houses one of the most important collections of drawings in the United States. And generations of drawing curators and scholars have been trained here. The museum also boasts the first conservation and research lab in America, which has long been the leader in the study of artist materials and techniques. Our curatorial and conservation staff have collaborated on countless projects over the years, and it is a pleasure to be highlighting just one of these. As Miriam recently put it, this exhibition is a love letter to drawings. It is also the result of the decades-long relationship that Penley and Miriam have had with one another and with the drawings that they selected, looking closely and always seeing more. Nearly all the drawings you will see on view in this exhibition are drawn from the collection, with just a few loans for which we are eternally grateful. This includes some loans from a private collection, Harvard's Houghton Library, and the Meteorological and Geological Museum of Harvard. This exhibition was made possible through the generous donors noted on the slide. And I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope by the end of the evening that your fingers will itch to draw as much as I do. And with that, I'd like to invite Miriam and Penley to the stage. Thank you.
Hi, gosh, it's great to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'm Miriam Stewart, and we are really delighted to welcome you to the opening. We're excited about the show, and we're looking forward to hearing from our speaker, Kim Schenck, and Penley will introduce her shortly. Okay. The exhibition focuses on 19th and through 21st century drawings executed in black chalk, charcoal, crayon, and graphite. These simple materials are easily accessible and don't require the use of implements like brushes or pens. They function as an extension of the artist's hand, responding to pressure and attack. Familiar and affordable, these carbon-based implements offer a variety of characteristics such as precision, diffusion, density, and atmosphere, and artists use them so expressively. They might use graphite to depict fine details, broad expanses of charcoal to fill large sheets, crayon to create texture and deep blacks, or chalk to produce tone. The idea for the show developed from the shared history that Penley and I have had studying and interpreting these drawings over several decades. As a curator and conservator, we confer frequently about cataloging drawings as we attempt to identify the sometimes puzzling materials used to produce them. Artists are able to achieve a wide variety of effects using chalk, charcoal, crayon, or graphite, and they may be used singly or together. It can be difficult to differentiate one from another, and we often jokingly refer to the maddening dilemma of, quote, dry black media. We've spent many hours looking under the microscope because magnification helps to reveal, for example, graphite's shiny layers and charcoal's characteristic splinters. In fact, we examined every drawing that you'll see in the exhibition to confirm or refine the media descriptions. Nearly all of the drawings in the exhibition are from the Harvard Art Museum's collection, as Sarah said, with a few important loans from a private collection at Harvard's Houghton Library. You'll see drawings by well-known artists ranging from Theodore Géricault to Richard Serra, and from Odilon Redon to Lee Bontecu, the drawing that Sarah mentioned. And you'll discover compelling drawings by artists who may not be as familiar to you, such as Frances Seymour Hayden, Bridget Machinsky-Denninghoff, and Toyin Oji Odutola. Now let's have a quick peek at the exhibition. The first gallery introduces the various media with drawings arranged according to the material used to create them. Samples of the materials from the Strauss Center for Conservation are included in display cases. There you'll find, for example, a lump of graphite, a variety of crayons, a chalk holder, and a selection of charcoal. There's even a piece of shale, from which black chalk is derived on loan from Harvard's Mineralogical Museum here at Harvard. Oops. And be sure to look for John Singer Sargent's charcoal sticks and Barnett Newman's marking and checking crayons. We'll hear more about these materials from Kim, but here is a brief introduction. Natural chalk, quarried from earthen deposits of shale or schist, is favored for its tonal density and soft, somewhat crumbly texture. Charcoal is wood that has been charred in an airtight container or oven. It adheres only lightly to the paper surface, causing it to be easily erased or smeared. Crayons are waxy or greasy implements made from colored pigments with a wax binder. Crayon frequently appears clumpy, especially where it stops or starts, and it often skims along the high points of textured paper. The humble pencil is composed of lead, not of lead, but of a remarkable material, graphite, which is pure carbon. Graphite's layers cleave easily from each other, allowing the material to slide onto paper and leaving a velvety gray mark that can be easily erased. And I'm going to pass it over to Penley.
Hi. So Sketch Shade Smudge focuses on the behavior of these four materials, along with the actions employed by the artist to manipulate them, with sections devoted to smudging, lifting, and scraping, among others. We'll briefly highlight a few of these actions. Smudging involves the softening or smearing of marks to blend an area. This technique is best suited to charcoal, which has no binder to adhere it to the paper, but graphite and chalk can also be smudged. Here, Feininger used his finger to render the edges of the descending cone of light. In the lift section, we highlight the many different implements that can be used to physically take away the media to create a highlight, like an eraser or a finger, a cloth, or even a piece of bread. Friable material, that is, media without a lot of binder, like charcoal or graphite, is more easily lifted. And Sargent was an expert of the judicious removal of charcoal. Artists sometimes use a sharp tool, like a penknife, to remove media, revealing the paper below, to create a highlight or emphasize an area, which you can see here in the streaks of rain. When examining works of art, we often position a light to the side of an object to help study the surface topography, and in the case of scraped passages, this strong side light may reveal abraded or disrupted paper fibers. The exhibition also features a gallery dedicated to the role that drawing plays in the education of an artist. This gallery is devoted to sketching and includes an array of figure studies and still life and landscape drawings. And two sculptures flank the display wall to tempt visitors to sketch from 2- and 3-dimensional objects. Paper and pencil are on offer, and our Division of Public Programs has scheduled several sessions with live models in the gallery. The exhibition is a tribute to Bill Robinson, the Maida and George Abrams Curator of Drawings Emeritus, who spearheaded many of these acquisitions and who particularly loved graphite drawings. Bill was a beloved colleague and friend, and this exhibition is dedicated to his memory. Sketch Shade Smudge highlights the astonishing variety, of ways in which the artist employs these modest materials. And we hope the exhibition will inspire visitors to pick up a pencil or a stick of charcoal and experiment. We're looking forward to sharing this exhibition with you all. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening. Kimberly Schenck is the former head of paper conservation at the National Gallery of Art, where she worked from 2006 to 2024. Before her tenure, I was in the right slide, okay. Before her tenure in Washington, she served as paper conservator and later director of conservation at the Baltimore Museum of Art. In addition to conserving many prints and drawings during her career, she has lectured and published on a range of topics investigating artist materials and techniques. Her favorite projects, and there were a lot of them, include a comprehensive review of metal point drawings, the use of Asian papers for etching, the soft ground etchings of Mary Cassatt, and most recently, the watercolors of insects by Joris Hofnagel. Currently, Kimberly is working on an essay with former National Gallery colleagues on macro scanning, X-ray fluorescence analysis of Hofnagel's insects. And this past spring, Kimberly had a senior fellowship in the Prints and Drawings Department of the Capodimonte Museum in Naples, Italy, sponsored by the American Friends of the Capodimonte. On a personal note, we must say that while working on our exhibition, Miriam and I frequently consulted Kim's illuminating essay on 19th century French drawings materials in the catalog, The Essence of Line, French Drawing from Ingres to Degas. Please welcome Kimberly Schenck.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming tonight. It's my great privilege to be here to share with you one of the things I love, and that is looking very closely at drawings. I had the wonderful privilege while at the Baltimore Museum, National Gallery, of looking at drawings without glazing, no plexiglass, no glass. I would have a magnifying head loop around my head. I had a flashlight in one hand so that I could look at the topography of the paper and the different characteristics of the media. And now I'm the general public. And so what I'm hoping tonight is that I can kind of share with you, introduce you to drawing media, and share with you some of the things that we in museums have the great privilege of looking at so closely. Okay, so by the end of this evening, after you see the show, after you've heard all three of our talks here, you're going to know an awful lot about Black drawing media. So in the exhibition, you have graphite pencils, which you all know so well. And at the top, that clump, that's natural graphite. Anything that comes from the earth can have different qualities about it. It can be very smooth when it makes a mark. It can have impurities and not be as high quality. So in the late 18th century, Napoleon marched in to Nicolas Jacques Conté, and he said, I need you to make a drawing, writing material where I don't have to depend on England, because all the best sources of graphite came from England. So Conté then grinds up what awful graphite he had. He mixed it with clay, made it into these thin little rods that he then fired. And that's what we have today in our pencils. Exactly what Nicolas Jacques Conté brought to the history of materials in the late 18th century. Charcoal, as you know, is something that is man-made, where you take various kinds of wood and you burn them in the absence of oxygen so they don't totally disintegrate. And they make these marks that are so easily smudged and smeared, and they just fly off the stick when you make that mark across the paper. Below is black chalk, another material that comes from the earth. And then wax crayon. Various crayons were kind of manufactured in the 19th and into the 20th century using different waxes and adding other ingredients. And wax-based crayons they don't smudge, they don't smear as easily as charcoal. They leave a mark you can't erase. It's very black, it's very dense. So when an artist chooses those materials, they choose different properties. One of the things they may use to manipulate charcoal and graphite and black chalk are stumps. It's not a particularly attractive word, but in French it's estampe. So it's a rolled piece of soft paper or leather that an artist can use both to blend an existing mark on a paper. It can also use it to do other things. It becomes a tool in and of itself. Graphite. I love this drawing by Delacroix. I love the gesture of it, the rapidity, the very reduced amount of lines he needs to create the panther. The leg, the bone that's there on the calf, the front of the lower part of the leg. Delacroix does a little bit of shading. This is one of the great things that graphite, in the history of graphite, has been used for, is doing gestural sketching. On the other side, on the right, you see a work by Aubrey Beardsley. And Beardsley's using graphite in a very different way. He's using it tonally, where he's building up these shades, these tones in the stonework and in the bird, depending upon the amount of pressure he puts on the graphite as it goes across the paper. And the marks are closely together and building up tones. Graphite is sort of grayish, and so to accentuate the initial and parts of the bird, he uses black ink, which is a darker, more emphatic material. This drawing by Adolf Menzel is very small. I think you're going to be shocked after seeing this slide how small the drawing is. Menzel's one of the great draftsmen in graphite pencil, and he's able to really capture this gentleman with a beard. He's using a soft graphite pencil. Soft graphite pencils have a lot more graphite than a hard graphite pencil, which has a lot more clay in it. The soft graphite he can manipulate either using a stump or his finger. So then once that stump or finger is really charged with black material, he can use that as his drawing implement. So on the cuff, okay, let's hope I have the right thing. Right here, he's actually taken his finger or his stump that now has graphite on it and made that really soft little bit the texture of the jacket. He does that throughout the drawing. Then, along the brim of the hat, really clear, he is removing graphite using an eraser. This drawing is made towards the end of the 19th century, where rubber-based erasers were available. Before that time, the rubber erasers were very abrasive, and they would scratch the paper. But even before the rubber became discovered in the late 18th century, people used bread. So what you would do with the bread is you'd take off the crust, and day-old bread. You don't want fresh bread, too much, oil perhaps, or it doesn't handle as nicely. And then you wad it up, and then you would pounce the surface of the paper to pull up the media below. Two very different 20th century graphite drawings. Diego Rivera, in this case, is using a laid paper. The other drawings you've seen on graphite were on a wove paper. Paper, and what I mean by laid and wove is sort of the texture that's in the paper that's imparted by the paper-making screen. So in a laid paper, if you look at it in transmitted light, and you'll see a paper later on, you'll see these very closely spaced lines that have less pulp and more pulp, and it has a kind of a linear texture to it, and Rivera is actually using a laid paper here, and you can see a little bit where the graphite is sitting on what I call the hills of the laid paper, and where he applies a lot more pressure, it will now go a little bit into the valleys. Wove papers, the screen looks more like a window screen. It's very even. I pulled up a Jasper Johns from the Baltimore Museum because I didn't have a photograph of the incredible Johns graphite and graphite wash drawing in the exhibition. Johns made a number of drawings with graphite wash, and you could buy little bottles of it. It's basically graphite that has been crumbled, pulverized, ground, and it's a powder. And you can apply it dry, or in the case of John's, he's using it in some kind of liquid, possibly an organic solvent or even water, and he's applying it by brush. In the drawing in the Baltimore Museum, the graphite is very coarse. It's not the fine, delicate powder that you see in the Jasper Johns drawing here in Harvard. Charcoal. This is a charcoal drawing, believe it or not. It's quite large. It's, I think, 23 by 28 inches. So for the period in the mid-19th century, this would be a large drawing. And this is by Theodor Karulda-Aleni. We know the date, or we don't know the date specifically of the drawing, but we do know that it's before 1855 because it was in an exposition in Paris. And this is a period in the history of charcoal where it becomes its own medium. Before this period, artists typically would use it more as a sketching tool or to sketch an idea on paper that they would then develop in another medium that doesn't smear and smudge. But here, in this case, this is all charcoal. And charcoal in the 19th century, it's not like today when you go into the art supply store and you have a couple of choices. You have vine charcoal and you have what's called compressed charcoal. And the compressed charcoal may be different hardnesses, and compressed charcoal is where they take natural charcoal, they pound it, pulverize it into a powder, and form it into a harder stick. But in the 19th century, you could buy charcoals made from a variety of different woods. And depending upon the wood that was burned, it might have a warm tone or a cool tone. In one of the manuals about drawing with charcoal, they told you not only to go to the colorman or art supply store, but to go to the charcoal maker who was making charcoal for boots, for all kinds of things. He could make charcoal out of broomsticks, and you could buy them. So there was all kinds of things available. So to Aligny, in the sky, what he did was he probably made his own charcoal powder, and then he took that chamois or a rag. He may have used what was called a rabbit's foot, and not a true hare's foot, but it had a handle like a backward spoon, and on the bottom layer, or the bottom, it was all wood, on the bottom is flat, and it would have a piece of chamois. And he would have his little charcoal powder, and then he could rub the charcoal just gently across the paper and create the even tones you see in the sky. Then he could take that stump that you saw earlier, but a clean one, not one that's used before, and he could pick out the highlights by pulling away the charcoal. He could also use bread as well. He's doing this technique elsewhere, but it's so obvious in the sky. Charcoal drawing is all about additive and subtractive methods. And one of the things that I'm afraid you can't see in the slide here, Aligny takes charcoal powder. Well, of course, he's making some of the drawing with a stick and then blending it with the stump. But he's also taking charcoal powder and he's mixing it with a natural resin that's liquid, in a solvent. And then he takes a brush, and to create some of the limbs in the trees, he's using charcoal, more or less almost like a wash, like a watercolor. And you can see it a little better in the actual drawing. The resin he's using is what was called a fixative. And in charcoal, you need something after you finish the drawing to secure those particles to the paper, or else they are prone for an accident. You place another drawing on top, and it ruins your original drawing. So fixatives were extremely important. Now on the right, I have modern day. I have 3 aerosol cans where the fixative is an acrylic resin in some kind of solvent. And then at the top right, in the colorful labels, that's a casein, and that's for pastels, for fixing pastels. But on the left, you can see some pages from an art supplier in Paris, in Allier, and they show you the different ways you could apply a fixative, this resin, this liquid resin. So, these are like 2 metal straws. One of the parts goes in the bottle of fixative, and the other one you blow through, and then you're spraying it onto the surface of the paper. They also had atomizers, like this, and you could also apply fixative to the back of the drawing using a brush, and the solvent takes the resin to the front, and it dries, and it holds the charcoal particles in place. I want you to also notice what this fixative is called. It's named Delacroix. The 19th century, so many products were named after an artist, a well-known artist. Charcoal drawing was incredibly popular, and I'm going to say this probably 10 times in the next 10 minutes, in the 19th century. The enthusiasts of charcoal drawing were called the fusanistes. Fusain is the French word for a particular type of charcoal from the spindle tree. And this is one of several treatises that were written. This one is by Maxime Lalande, and you may know Lalande's name. He wrote about etching. He was a printer as well as a printmaker himself. But he wrote this book about drawing with charcoal. And one of the things he says, let's see if I can find it. This is the problem if you don't use notes. Then when you do need notes, you can't find them. Okay, Maxime Lalande, this is more of a tour de force kind of drawing by Lalande from the National Gallery. Many of his drawings are a little more atmospheric. Here he's using charcoal, additive and subtractive methods. He's also using white chalk. This is another very large drawing. So he says, charcoal is the kind of drawing that approximates most closely the effects of painting, all the color and shimmer of which it has. He wrote that in 1869 in his technical book that was meant for artists, but as well for amateurs. His good friend, this is a paper. Lalande talks about, in his treatise, about these papers that are laid paper. So this is a transmitted light image, and here you can see, whoa, wrong button. Okay. You can see the lines, the laid lines that are going this way, and the chain lines that are going this way. And this is the watermark. This is a wire that's sewn onto the paper-making screen. Lalande was so famous, I don't know if the paper maker had Lalande agreed to this, but my guess is yes. I hope he got paid a royalty, but I don't know. But this was the type of paper Lalande used for a lot of his charcoal drawings. And the drawing here by Henri Harpigny is very similar looking to some of Lalande's sketches in charcoal. Now, this is his rival and good friend, Allanger. Augustin Allanger also wrote a treatise on drawing with charcoal, and there were several more out on the marketplace in France. They were sold in 5 or 6 editions. And this Allanger here is in English. And this is the drawing that is in the exhibition by Allanger, but I wanted to also show you the work in the National Gallery's collection where he is combining charcoal with black and white chalk, and he's using a blue paper. Blue paper in the history of French drawing plays a very large role. It was used, blue paper provides a middle ground, shall we say, when you work with black and white crayon, black and white chalks. And this is what Allanger says about paper. I am forced to condemn papers with too coarse a grain, or with regular divisions, because I find it absolutely necessary that backgrounds should be worked down to a fine texture to give them distance, however deep their tone may be. I don't know if I can imagine an artist speaking today and saying, I condemn a paper. They may say, I love a particular paper, but condemn. So this kind of shows you the heightened environment of the Fusionistes in the 19th century. There were many things out on the market at the time. First, the charcoal box of charcoals at the top. You didn't get it in just a little plastic wrapped container. You could get a big box. And these are all natural charcoals. And now let's move to the bottom here. These are 2 different drawing boxes. In the 19th century, one of the things that really drove the artist suppliers and artist market were not artists alone, but also people like all of us, the amateurs. At that time, you could travel, and everyone was encouraged to take drawing boxes or watercolor boxes with them. So here we have 2 boxes, and these are both manufactured by British makers. And you can see the one on the right has this little hole for your thumb, so you could work outdoors. You can see the different kinds of crayons in there, some chalks, also the stumps. But one thing that's extremely important are these. These are called stumping palettes. And they were added to the drawing box. And what you did with the stumping palette is you would take your charcoal or your black chalk and you would rub it against the surface. And on the left, that's a very fine sandpaper. And on the right is chamois. So you would rub it and you're creating this powder. Then you take the stump and you rub the stump into that powder, and then you use that as the drawing tool. And so it doesn't tend to make dark marks. It tends to make these very sensuous, lighter marks. And artists often would just use a stump to make parts of the drawing. Another thing that's on the market in the 19th century that then disappears in the 20th century is sauce. And sauce, up there in the corner, look how dark black that is. It was made from a black pigment, usually lamp black. There's no binder. It was compressed and made into these sticks. It wasn't meant for drawing the stick across paper. Instead, what it was meant for was stumping. One of my favorite drawing books from the 19th century is by Armand Cassan. And in this drawing book, and it's meant more for amateurs, he talks about all these various kinds of media and drawing with them. But of course, as a paper conservator, my favorite part are the samples of paper that he put in the back. So of course, I went to eBay and had to buy this for myself. So the papers in the center there are for charcoal. And one of the things I want you to notice is there's only one that's a wove paper, and that's this one, papier boule. It has a soft surface. When drawing with charcoal, you tend to want something that will help to hold those particles in place. But the rest of the papers are laid papers, and they're called ang. And once you go into the exhibition and you look at, or you saw the slide already of Ang, who is making these incredibly delicate graphite drawings. He never used paper like that for his graphite drawings. This is a highly textured paper meant specifically for black chalk and charcoal. He instead used a wove paper. But because his name was so popular in the 19th century, they're called papier ang. So notice on the graphite papers, they look smoother. They're all wove. Also, notice there's no white paper in the section for charcoal. Papers that were a little creamier in color were preferred for charcoal and not harsh white. So later in the century, you have charcoal being used not only for landscape, which was preferred by the Fusanistes, but by Roland Redon and their amazing charcoal drawings. And he's using, again, using the stick to draw and lifting out, in this case, on the man's forehead, using a stump or a rag, possibly bread, maybe an eraser. And he would apply at first his fixative from the back. And at the Art Institute of Chicago, they did some analysis on these drawings, which he called his noirs. And I think they found copal varnish, which is a natural resin. It sort of turns yellow. Well, it starts out yellow, so it goes even darker as it begins to age. And he first floated the paper on the surface or else brushed the fixative on the back that would seep through the paper and hold the charcoal particles. He may have applied fixative more than once. So in this case, and the reason I say that is, here's another detail from up above here, up above the man's head. This is the other thing. Redon was doing a lot of mystical imagery, and where he would incorporate parts of a human and parts of an animal, or in this case, it's almost like a ribbon, not necessarily a snake. What I want you to see, and I hope you're able to see them from there, are these very fine, light lines. Now, because he had a fair amount of fixative on his drawing that he'd applied either from the back or the front, the surface on a microscopic level is very crusty. So he could take a needle and draw through that crust and sort of removing the charcoal. And there are a number of Redon drawings that have this technique in them. Another of my favorite drawings is the Mondrian from the early part of the 20th century. Most of you know more about his works later on when he becomes involved with abstraction. But this is a pivotal time in Mondrian's career. He spends a lot of time along the Amstel River, below Amsterdam, making charcoal and drawings, very large. This is a very large drawing. The Baltimore Museum has a related drawing from the same period. This drawing is more fully developed, also with tones, where he's doing a lot of blending of the tones, whereas in the Baltimore Museum drawing, there's a lot more line work. What I like a lot about this drawing are these negative spaces, because this is when Mondrian is looking not only at the positive, but the negative. And so he takes a rag or something, a eraser, and removes the charcoal, but then he draws around it, like where the branch is. So that makes it somewhat pop out to your eyes a little bit more. He also takes different colored chalks, might not be so easy to see here, and he does some outlining as well. It's quite an amazing, beautiful drawing. And now to modern times, to contemporary times. This is the artist Chuck Holtzman. This drawing, even though I read the dimensions, I expected it to be monumental. It's actually small in size for a contemporary drawing. He, too, is using that additive, subtractive flexibility that charcoal has. So instead of using a stump or a rag, he's using a sander, a rotary sander, and to create the light orbs that you see at the top right of the drawing. The background also has charcoal kind of embedded or smudged into the paper. And then these shapes. I said earlier about how charcoal goes everywhere when you make a line. In order to get that really crisp edge, he had to use a stencil to basically protect the paper from the charcoal flying in that direction. And I learned all this from colleagues here who had interviewed the artist. and spoke to him about his materials and methods. Black chalk. Now, black chalk, I had to go way back to the 17th century to find something that I knew was natural black chalk. By the 18th century, the deposits of natural black chalk were not as high quality as they once were. So the colorman, the artist supplier, starts making a fabricated black chalk. It's not always easy to tell, I think. Sometimes you tend to think of fabricated black chalks as being black, darker, until you get a piece of 20th century, 21st century French black chalk in your hand and make a mark with it and see how black it is. So this I know, Vouet, from when he's working, that he's using natural black chalk. On the right, Jean-Francois Millet is at a period where there's very little natural black chalk on the market. So the likelihood is that he's using some kind of fabricated black chalk. Again, our good friend Nicolas Jacques Conté is making the Conté crayon. Those of you who make drawings know that name from going into the market, the supply shop. And he would take lamp black, a black pigment, combine it with clay, again, make it into these sticks, and fire them. And Millet is combining black chalk and also some charcoal. Charcoal is still a little bit more blendable, and it gives you a softer gray than black chalk. So Millet used these Conté crayons, these fabricated black chalks that make a mark. The mark can be smudged, it can be smeared a little bit, but it also tends to stay a little bit where placed. So one of the things you can see here are these marks right there, these tiny little marks that are black. So he's using the black chalk there, but in his pastel work, he is always combining it with Conté crayon. So he develops it with black and a little bit of color. And the pastels he's using are also hard. They're not the soft, creamy ones that Sennelier, for example, is known for. But his pastel drawings have this appearance. They all have this appearance where you see these really strong blacks that are made with a Conté crayon. And of course, the master of the Conté crayon is Seurat. Seurat was a pointillist painter, and his paintings would have tiny dots of paint in different colors to build a form, so that when you stepped back, you might see one color, and up close you might see 10 different colors, including one totally opposite of what you see from a distance, pointillism. And so instead, in drawing, he lets his paper and his Conté crayon do the work for him. He's using a very rough paper. It was a paper that, you can see the watermark in the paper, Michelet. Michelet was a seller in Paris who had these papers made for him. And so with the Conté crayon, because it does sit where placed, comparatively speaking with charcoal, it's sitting, the blacks are sitting on top of the paper texture and not really filtering as much into those valleys. And where he's even building up a lot of the black, he's not using a ton of pressure, but he's just continually building up the media there. You can still see these little white flecks, and that's the paper below shining through. Here is the watermark, the Michelet watermark. I put it this direction so you could actually read it. A lot of his drawings of this style are on Michelet papers. Today, I've been mentioning Conté crayon, but today when we hear the term crayon, we always think of wax-based crayons, Crayola crayons, which we all used when we were young, and we may still use them. So this is a work by Henri Fatin-Latour. He is drawing, and this is a drawing, this is a lithograph print. Lithography was invented by Sennefelder at the end of the 18th century, based on the antipathy of oil or grease and water, and you would draw on a stone with a greasy crayon. So lithographic crayons not only contain wax, they also contain tallow, grease, a little bit of resin, soap. And so Fatin-Latour made a lot of lithographs. So it was a tool that he had in his studio. He knew the kinds of marks it would make. He knew how to develop the drawing. He also knew that, like, if he's drawing on the stone, you'll see some tiny little knife marks here where he's scraping into the paper in this case. It's a tracing paper, so it's a little yellow, but there's a white paper behind it, so what you're seeing is also the white, because he's gone through the tracing paper, which is wispy thin. He can do that same technique of scratching into the lithographic stone, which you can see in different parts of the lithograph. So you will see artists who make a lot of prints, a lot of lithographs, using litho crayon. It's there, it's very handy, you know the marks it makes. It cannot be erased. You can only scratch into it. It smears, but you have to use some pressure to get it to smear. There are other kinds of crayons that have different waxes in them. Some of them are drier than a litho crayon. These two drawings are great, I think, next to each other. Charles Sheeler was a photographer as well as a painter and draftsman. And if you know his photographs, you know that he was very interested in different grays, in different levels of gray. And he's doing the same thing here, but with his drawings, and he's using crayon, and depending upon the amount of pressure he places on the crayon. Also, this paper has some texture to it. So again, it's sitting more on the tops, the hills of that textured paper than the valleys. Albert Gold, you can see the mark. You can see the tool. You can see where he is using the end of that crayon and where he's using the side of the crayon, the broader marks, especially in here. You can see somewhat of the side. I think, but I'm not sure, that he may have too used some kind of stencil or something to prevent his marks from traveling elsewhere on the paper, to make some of those shapes. But this is a really wonderful drawing. I mean, to capture the end of lumber like that is really fantastic. So this two drawings by the same artist, Kirchner. So you have one in charcoal and one in crayon. And they have very different attributes. You can see that the charcoal drawing, there's some smearing. You can also see the mark that it's making on a very smooth paper. And then on the crayon drawing on the right, you can see how bold it is, how black. Also the paper surface, where how the crayon's sitting on the paper. So artists always capitalize on the qualities of the characteristics of a media. So with charcoal, it's more gray. Black crayon, it's denser black, but it's also the meatiness of the mark you make. The black crayon has some meat to it, whereas the charcoal, it's all about these fluttering particles. So artists, you can combine those media, which that you've seen. And here we have two drawings. John Wilson, whose work I've just gotten to know in the past couple of years. This is a fantastic, beautiful drawing. And what he's combining charcoal with black and white crayon. And this is fantastic right here. How he uses charcoal to really depict the skin, the softness, the uniformity in some ways of the skin. He uses charcoal, of course, in the face and the hair, and then puts in those accents. But it's that charcoal on the arm that I think is so really beautiful, his use of it. And then we have Joel Shapiro here on the left, who I think of as the master of the smudge. This drawing is immense, but every one of these little smudges take on this incredible, beautiful life of their own. He's using charcoal, so if you know his sculptures, you can almost see his sculpture in space here with those blocks, the bronze, the kind of the rectangles, and the charcoal, the gray. Here's the charcoal. Then he's using black pastel, which we haven't talked about, but if you can imagine, it's a black pigment that's almost as powdery and flyaway as charcoal. And so hence, no wonder he has smudges everywhere. He's using two very smudgy materials. Then the blue crayon, but here, when you see the drawing, those of you who make drawings, you'll see, that's a width of an eraser, a white plastic eraser, and he's using it not only to lift away charcoal and black chalk, but also as a mark-making tool, creating the white itself. And for those of you who don't know, he also made drawings of fingerprints, where he would dip his finger, his thumb or whatever, into ink and make rows of fingerprints. And there is one here at Harvard, which you can see it online. It's not up right now, but you can see it online. So I want to thank you for joining me this evening. And I love talking about drawings, and I could talk about another hour or two. And I didn't know where to fit the martini into my talk, but I just love that drawing, and it seemed like a good drawing to end on, a foot. And so I want to thank the photography departments of all three institutions for their images that I used tonight. The details that you saw, the incredible details, are all from Penley, who sent them to me. And I want to thank Miriam and Penley for inviting me here. This has been a great time. And to the many, many people throughout my career who have shared their knowledge with me. And there are a number of them in the audience tonight, both here and online, and I am grateful to them. So thank you all for coming. There will be some questions and answers, or maybe answers, we hope. There will be microphones, and we best if you use a microphone. My hearing is not the best, and so are there any questions?
You should have called it a
Oh, very good. I'll think of that next time. Thank you. Yes.
It's already on.
Thank you very much, wonderful talk. Is there a particular fixative that you would recommend, especially for a mixed media drawing?
Well, fixatives are, they're an artist's choice. So for example, not all pastels are fixed. There are a variety of fixatives out on the market. I don't know what I would suggest. When I was in school, I used hairspray. I would not suggest hairspray. There are better things on the market today. The acrylics usually don't yellow so much. There are, Lesco is a very reputable brand. It's also, though, the characteristics of that spray and how it comes out, what you can do with it. I've tried the Spectrafix, which is casein, and that's, I think they did some study. They looked at the writings of Ruart, who was talking about Degas and use of casein. They don't, at least the one, when I tried it a few years ago, they didn't tend to darken some of the colors. Sprays, the one thing is always start off the drawing and then apply this, because they sputter. And so I don't know if I can recommend one over the other because I don't use them. We don't tend to use them in conservation. If a drawing comes to us, we don't apply fixatives. So I'm not as familiar with them. Artists in the crowd may have some better ideas. Also, I will say online, when I wanted to know more about pastel fixatives a few years ago when we did a pastel exhibition, I looked at, I just, put in fixatives and all of these online chats came up. And some people still use steam. There's an artist who just uses steam for pastel.
I'm trying to understand the difference between laid and woven papers. Can you hear me?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to understand the difference between laid and woven papers. Reeve, the printmaking papers, for instance, are those laid, mostly?
The what paper?
Printmaking papers, like Reeves.
Printmaking papers. Many of them that you buy on the market today are wove.
Oh, really?
Like, are you thinking of Reeves BFK? That's wove. But Reeves did make some laid papers. Arche is wove. The easiest thing to do is look at it, hold it up into the light, and if you see a pattern in transmitted light, that's usually a laid paper. A wove paper will be more even.
Thank you.
I don't know what laid papers are out. In watercolor, there are laid papers out there. There's also Fabriano papers that are laid, some of the Fabrianos. But some of those are drawing papers more so than printmaking papers.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. That's helpful.
Pass it on. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Kim. That was fantastic. I'm not familiar with litho crayon drawings. I don't know that I've ever actually seen one in real life. Are they identifiable just visual means or other means?
Well, yes and no. You can identify that something is a crayon drawing. You may not be able to identify that it's a lithographic crayon. And you have to also be very careful with litho crayon because some of them are somewhat water soluble. And I used to make lithographs, and I'd do the drawing and then I'd add a little water. It's because of the soap content. Now, those from the 19th century, I don't know if they'd still be as soluble. They tend to have a stronger, greasier feel. So when you go into the exhibition, don't be ashamed to get at weird angles to look at things in different light. The Fatin Latour, you can see that it's a little bit greasier, but still, crayons all have kind of they all have a waxy binder, so they do have a sheen to it. I mean, I worked in the National Gallery. We had a drawing that came to the lab, and two of the young conservators said, I think it's litho crayon, and I said, no, it's China marker. It is so dry. It was also by an artist who did not make lithographs. It's not that that matters, but you have a lithographic crayon in your studio because you make prints, but it was very dry. And so I sent the Mellon Fellow out to buy some China markers just to test them. So it's not always easy. Yes.
Thank you for sharing the knowledge with us. I have a question about the two images that you shared earlier that have a lot of raindrops and even directional raindrops. So I'm a little bit curious of how that raindrops were created, because erasing them, that's a lot of raindrops. There were two images that you shared earlier that they were like raindrops. Or maybe it was even earlier. The two drawings with a lot of raindrops.
Raindrops. Shepherdess in the Rain? The which one? Segatini? No, I did not show the Segatini.
Yeah, I think it's maybe even earlier. But I wonder if you know how.
It's scraping. He had to go in with a knife or some kind of tool to actually remove that media so that you would see the white of the paper below. Yes, yes, they're in the exhibition. Yeah, yeah. Segatini was also a printmaker. Any other questions? Okay, wonderful. Okay, oh.
I just want to say that I'm glad you didn't add color into this equation.
Oh my goodness, no.
Which would have blown people's minds.
There's just enough color to help keep you awake, but otherwise, no. The idea is this is about black media and how it has always been engaged. It always engages artists, no matter what period. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the exhibition.